And to speak on the Electoral Disqualification of Convicted Prisoners Amendment Bill, and I did pause at the beginning because I was speechless for a second after the member Sandra Gowdie's speech. I thought, given she is the chair of the Law and Order Select Committee, that she might have a little more substance in what she was speaking about. She might be able to extend her speech to the full 10 minutes, because if it really is of that much significance, Mr. Speaker, then I'm sure that it wouldn't be so difficult to fill up the 10-minute space of speech time. But obviously, as we already knew, there was very little to speak about, because this is actually rather an insignificant bill, Mr. Speaker, and I follow on from the Honourable Member Clayton Cosgrove and support each and every word that he said in his speech earlier. And when I say that this is an insignificant bill, Mr. Speaker, I say that in light of something I attended at lunchtime, and that was a demonstration out the front of Parliament where we stood together in solidarity to support the women across the Pacific that are victims, Sandra Gowdie. I hope you care about the victims of domestic violence, the women and children that are victims of domestic violence. And I look at this bill, Mr. Speaker, the Electoral Disqualification of Convicted Prisoners Amendment Bill, and think that it is so incredibly trivial, insignificant, will bring about very little, well, actually no change or no positive, there'll be no positive repercussions for New Zealand society. And yet at the bottom of our order paper is a bill, the domestic violence bill, languishing because that government chooses to prioritise such trivial matters as the one we are discussing tonight, rather than things that should matter, like the domestic violence that is committed against women and children in this country. And it really does show that that side of the House has major problems, Mr. Speaker, with regards to prioritising what the real issues should be in this Parliament that we should be discussing. Now, Mr. Speaker, the one question that I have to ask when I look at this bill, given that it is a law and order bill, it has come through the Select Committee, is will this bill act as a determinant to crime? Now, a deterrent to crime, Mr. Speaker, and I think, actually, no. I can't envisage any person who is incarcerated or any person who's on the verge of committing a crime thinking, oh, better not commit this burglary, otherwise I'll go to prison and I'll lose my right to vote. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, that for most of us, for all of us in this House, it is a right to vote. For many people around the world, it is an absolute privilege to have the right to vote. But for many of the people I assume that are incarcerated, they may not actually see it as being one of the priorities in their lives. And in fact, I do wonder how many of those that are incarcerated have actually exercised that right to vote, have actually felt a sense of loss when they have been incarcerated and lost that right to vote. So, Mr. Speaker, it does seem rather insignificant and almost just a complete waste of time with regards to what that member was attempting to do. So, Mr. Speaker, when we look at whether or not it could act as a deterrent to crime, I mean, obvious common sense dictates that actually no, it probably won't. There has been no analysis in the explanatory note of what harm this bill is designed to remedy by returning to the pre-1993 situation. The Electoral Commission and the Solicitor General had sound reasons for recommending the change. The member promoting this bill has not provided any compelling reason for why this change is needed or wanted, and the Select Committee, considering the bill, did not receive any such evidence either. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, and to every member of the House, this bill will not make New Zealanders any safer, and it will not reduce crime or recidivism at all. So why is that member doing it? Well, unfortunately, we can only assume, because his explanation is rather weak, but we can only assume that it's an attempt to try and make the National Party again look hardline on issues of law and order. The reality, it means nothing. It looks like they're doing something, but I think actually the general public of New Zealand wants to know that there is substance to the legislation that we're pushing through. They want to know that when we are paid to be here in the House, that we're actually doing things that are worthwhile to the citizens of New Zealand. And unfortunately, this bill doesn't achieve it at all. Mr. Speaker, when I was going through this bill, and listening to some of the arguments for or against it, we were just actually having a discussion, myself and the Honourable Member Steve Chadwick and Rajan Prasad, and thinking, well, actually this bill is probably as insignificant as the military manoeuvres bill that is also being put up by the national government, and it just really does kind of impress on us the type of the type of legislation, the type of agenda that the national government has. Now, this bill aims to punish prisoners by denying them the right as if it is a right or privilege, but voting can also be seen as a civic duty. And the one concern I do have, Mr. Speaker, because, I mean, the right has been in the past taken away from those who have committed serious offences, but the one concern I do have is that for many of those that are incarcerated, they've never ever exercised that right, and in many ways never engaged in that civic duty at all. And you do wonder whether, when they've committed crimes of 3 years or less, whether that might actually be a good time to try and engage them with what is happening in terms of politics, in terms of the way their country runs, in terms of actually caring about what goes on around them and knowing how legislation, the way in which Parliament can actually impact on their lives. And you do wonder, a number of them would be rather disengaged altogether. You do wonder whether, as part of that rehabilitation, as part of that work that goes on to ensuring that they can come out and be contributing citizens of our country, because we do want to have hope that they will be rehabilitated and be able to contribute, that part of that would actually be supporting them in understanding what that civic duty is and how much of a privilege it is actually to vote. Now, as it stands, this bill will mean prisoners cannot register as electors. Us on this side of the House, we often have problems making sure that all of our people are on the electoral roll, and it is hard enough to keep people enrolled in the best of circumstances. Now, what this bill will do is it basically will result in the mass disenfranchisement of many of the people who go to prison because they are unlikely to re-enrol upon release. So, even more so or less engaged than what perhaps they were before they went in. Now, with lesser offences and shorter periods of incarceration, there are much better prospects of rehabilitation, which is why the argument was put forward that perhaps we don't need to take away the right from those that are incarcerated for short terms. Reinforcing a responsible attitude and a sense of civic duty is actually undermined by removing the ability to vote. Now, this bill would create anomalies that did come up through the select committee process, and it was something that was just unforeseen by the person that put the bill forward, and also by the person that you'd rely on to actually run the select committee and to actually see any problems down the line, the chairperson of the select committee, Sandra Gowdy. It's been referred to, the select committee over this bill has been referred to as a sham and a complete waste of time. As this bill amends electoral law, it would have been far more appropriate for it to have been referred to the Electoral Legislation Committee, or at least the Justice and Electoral Committee in the first place. But it's another instance where it doesn't look like the Minister of Justice actually wanted to have anything to do with it. As Clayton Cosgrove said, just like the Three Strikes bill, we do wonder whether the Minister of Justice realises that this is a bill that is insignificant and actually something that he doesn't want to put his name to, hence why it ended up going through the Law and Order Select Committee. Mr. Speaker, we won't be supporting this bill on this side of the House. We encourage all of our parliamentary colleagues to vote against this bill as well. Mr. Quinn will not go down in history as a top-rate famous parliamentarian for this piece of legislation, and no one will be patting him on the back for it. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.